The year 1873 dawned under a sky heavy with the promise of progress. Across Europe, the engines of industry roared, scientific discoveries reshaped understanding, and the age of reason sought to illuminate every shadowed corner of existence. Yet, in the remote, conservative village of Oberammer, nestled deep within a secluded valley shrouded by ancient forests, the old ways still held sway. Superstition clung to the cobblestones, and the whispers of folklore were as potent as any scientific treatise. It was into this world, a delicate balance between the encroaching light of modernity and the enduring shadows of tradition, that Emma Richter made her profoundly unsettling entrance. Her birth was not heralded by the joyful cries of a newborn, but by a silence so absolute, so unnerving, that it would forever mark her as a child apart, a child of enigma. The Richter family was a pillar of the Oberammer community. Johann Richter, a stern but fair carpenter, was known for his meticulous craftsmanship and unwavering practicality. His wife, Ilara, was a woman of quiet strength, her hands calloused from years of tending their small farm and her heart filled with a simple, devout faith. They were a family rooted in the tangible, the explainable, their lives governed by the rhythms of the seasons and the honest labor of their hands. The arrival of their first child, a daughter, had been eagerly anticipated, a beacon of hope in their hard-working lives. But from the moment of her emergence into the world, Emma defied all expectations, shattering the familiar comfort of their existence with a silence that spoke volumes. The midwife, Frau Schmidt, a woman who had ushered countless lives into Oberammer, for over 40 years, knew the sounds of birth intimately, the mother's cries, the hurried breaths, and then, invariably, the infant's first indignant wail. But with Emma, there was nothing. No gasp, no cry, no protest against the sudden cold of the world. Just a profound, chilling silence. Frau Schmidt, her brow furrowed with a confusion she had never known, checked the child frantically, searching for any sign of distress, any indication of life beyond the faint flutter of her tiny chest. Emma's eyes, remarkably open and unnervingly still, met the midwife's gaze with an intensity that seemed far beyond her newborn state. It was a silence so profound it felt like a presence, a watchful, ancient quietude that filled the small, lamp-lit room and left Frau Schmidt with a shiver that had nothing to do with the night's chill. As Emma grew, her atypical development became increasingly apparent. She was a child of unsettling calmness. Where other infants fussed and cried, Emma observed. Where others reached and grasped, Emma seemed to simply perceive. Her movements were deliberate, almost preternaturally graceful, yet devoid of the clumsy exuberance typical of a toddler. She rarely spoke, and when she did, her voice was soft, almost ethereal, her words chosen with a precision that belied her years. Her gaze, a piercing, unnervingly still blue, seemed to penetrate beyond the surface, as if she saw truths hidden from ordinary eyes. She never threw tantrums, never demanded attention with childish wails. Instead, she commanded it with her profound, unsettling stillness. Her parents, initially relieved by her quiet nature, soon found themselves increasingly bewildered, then subtly unnerved by their own daughter. The first inexplicable phenomena began subtly, almost imperceptibly, localized to Emma's presence. A small wooden toy left on the floor would sometimes be found on a high shelf, as if placed there by an unseen hand. A flickering candle flame would suddenly extinguish itself in a draftless room when Emma was near, only to reignite moments later. The heavy grandfather clock in the hall, usually a reliable timekeeper, would occasionally chime out of sequence, its resonant tones echoing eerily through the quiet house, always when Emma was in the vicinity. These were not the boisterous disturbances of a poltergeist, but rather fleeting, almost shy anomalies, easily dismissed by Johann as drafts or faulty mechanisms. Alara, however, with a mother's intuition, felt a growing unease, a prickling sensation that these occurrences were somehow connected to her silent child. As Emma entered her 5th year, the phenomena grew bolder, more frequent, and undeniably linked to her presence. Objects would not merely shift, they would sometimes float for a moment, suspended in the air before gently descending. Small, inexplicable lights, like captured fireflies, would sometimes dance around her head in the dim light of evening. The whispers, faint at first, grew more distinct, though never forming coherent words, a low, murmuring chorus that seemed to emanate from the very air around her. These occurrences were still subtle enough to be rationalized by Johann, who, clinging to his practicality, blamed frayed nerves and overactive imaginations. But Alara could no longer deny the truth. Her daughter was different, profoundly so, a living enigma that defied the laws of their ordered world. The Richter family, once so integrated into the fabric of Oberammer, began to feel the chilling winds of isolation. The villagers, a close-knit community, were quick to notice the strange occurrences, the unsettling quietness of Emma, and the growing pallor in Ilara's face. Whispers began to circulate, hushed and fearful, in the baker's shop and by the village well. They spoke of Emma, the silent one, of the child with old eyes, and of the strange happenings at the Richter farm. Some, rooted in ancient folklore, spoke of a fey-touched child, a changeling left in place of a human infant. Others, with a more sinister interpretation, murmured about a cursed child, a harbinger of ill fortune. The children of Oberammer were warned to avoid Emma, to steer clear of the Richter farm, and soon the once familiar path to their home became less trodden, their visits from neighbors fewer and farther between. Johann and Alara found themselves caught in a terrifying dilemma, torn between their love for their daughter and a growing, profound fear of the inexplicable. Johann, desperate to maintain his practical worldview, sought out the village doctor, a kindly but conventional man who could offer no explanation for Emma's unsettling calmness or the strange phenomena. He prescribed tonics for Ilara's nerves and advised Johann to ensure the house was well maintained, dismissing the occurrences as products of stress and overwork. Ilara, her faith shaken, secretly sought counsel from Father Klaus, the stern village priest. Father Klaus, a man steeped in scripture and tradition, initially spoke of demonic influence, but after a terrifying, unexplainable incident during an attempted blessing at the Richter home, a heavy crucifix inexplicably vibrating and then falling from the wall when Emma was near, he retreated, his face pale, muttering about forces beyond our understanding and advising the family to pray. The parents' struggle became a silent, agonizing battle. Johann, unable to reconcile the inexplicable with his practical mind, grew increasingly withdrawn, his carpentry shop becoming his refuge from the unsettling reality of his home. Alara, her heart aching with a mother's love, yet chilled by a mother's fear, found herself caught between protecting her daughter and protecting her family from the growing dread. They tried to hide the phenomena, to rationalize them, to pretend that Emma was just a quiet, unusual child. But the whispers of the manor, the shifting objects, the inexplicable lights, and the chilling silence that surrounded Emma Richter were undeniable. Science, as they knew it, offered no answers, and faith seemed to offer only fear. The stage was set for the next terrifying chapter as the unseen influence around Emma began to manifest in ways that could no longer be ignored or explained away. The unsettling silence that had marked Emma Richter's birth had, by her 5th year, blossomed into a profound, undeniable anomaly. The small, fleeting phenomena, the shifting toys, the flickering candles, the errant clock chimes, had grown bolder, more frequent, and undeniably linked to her presence. Johann Richter, the practical carpenter, clung desperately to rational explanations, his workshop becoming a sanctuary from the inexplicable. Ilara, his wife, however, could no longer deny the chilling truth. Their daughter was a living enigma, a child whose very existence seemed to defy the laws of their ordered world. The village of Oberhammer, once a comforting haven, now regarded the Richter farm with a mixture of fear and suspicion, its inhabitants whispering tales of a fey-touched or cursed child. This growing isolation, coupled with the escalating strangeness, marked the beginning of the unseen influence, a growing anomaly, a period where Emma's peculiar abilities began to manifest in ways that could no longer be ignored or explained away. As Emma transitioned from a silent observer to a child of burgeoning awareness, the subtle anomalies surrounding her began to take on a more deliberate, almost intelligent quality. It was no longer just objects shifting. It was as if an invisible hand, guided by Emma's unconscious will, was beginning to interact with the world. A dropped needle would not merely fall to the floor, but would sometimes hover for a moment, glinting in the lamplight, before gently settling onto a nearby table. A vase of wilting flowers placed near Emma would occasionally seem to perk up, its petals regaining a fleeting vibrancy, only to droop again once she moved away. These were not grand, destructive displays, but rather small, intimate miracles, unsettling in their quiet defiance of gravity and natural decay. Ilara, watching these occurrences with a mix of awe and terror, began to see a pattern, a subtle responsiveness in the phenomena to Emma's moods or unspoken desires. If Emma looked with longing at a book on a high shelf, the book might, moments later, slide to the edge, almost within reach. The whispers that had once been faint and indistinct around Emma now grew into a low, murmuring chorus, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very air itself. It was never coherent language, never a voice that could be identified, but a constant, almost musical hum, interwoven with faint, rustling sounds, like dry leaves skittering across a floor, even indoors. This ethereal chorus was particularly pronounced when Emma was deep in thought or focused on an object, giving the impression that the air itself was alive with unseen energies responding to her presence. Johann, when he heard it, would dismiss it as the wind or the creaking of the old house, but Ilara knew better. She would often find herself straining to understand the murmurs, convinced they held a secret, a key to her daughter's strange nature, yet they always remained just beyond the grasp of comprehension, a constant, unsettling background to their lives. Emma's own interactions with the world remained profoundly atypical. She rarely engaged in the boisterous play of other children, preferring solitary pursuits. She would spend hours simply sitting, her unnervingly still blue eyes fixed on seemingly mundane objects, a cobweb in the corner, a dust motes dancing in a sunbeam, a single drop of water clinging to a leaf. During these moments of intense focus, the phenomena around her would often intensify. The air around her would shimmer faintly, objects nearby might tremble, or the subtle murmurs would swell. It was as if her quiet contemplation was a form of profound interaction with the unseen, a silent dialogue with forces beyond ordinary perception. Her parents, witnessing these deep, almost trance-like states, felt a growing distance between themselves and their daughter, a sense that she inhabited a world they could never truly enter. The isolation of the Richter family from the Oberhammer community grew more pronounced. The children of the village, once curious, now actively avoided Emma, their parents' fearful whispers having taken root. Emma herself seemed largely unaffected by this ostracization. She never sought out playmates, never expressed loneliness. It was as if her inner world, populated by the unseen influences that surrounded her, was sufficient. This detachment, however, only deepened the villagers' conviction that she was not truly one of them, reinforcing their fears of a cursed or fey-touched child. The path to the Richter farm became overgrown, its infrequent visitors a testament to the community's growing apprehension. Johann, once a respected craftsman, found his commissions dwindling, his once bustling workshop now echoing with an unsettling silence that mirrored his home. Ilara, desperate for answers and increasingly burdened by the weight of her daughter's anomaly, began to seek out information beyond the confines of Oberammer. She secretly corresponded with a distant cousin in a larger town, a woman known for her interest in spiritualism and the burgeoning field of psychical research. The cousin, intrigued by Ilara's vague but unsettling descriptions, sent her pamphlets and books detailing cases of table tipping, spirit manifestations, and poltergeist activity reported in scientific journals and popular newspapers of the day. Ilara devoured these texts by lamplight, her heart aflutter with a mixture of hope and dread. Could Emma be a medium? Was she a conduit for unseen forces, a living bridge to the spirit world? The explanations offered by these texts, while still terrifying, at least provided a framework, a language for the inexplicable that Father Klaus and the village doctor could not. Johann, however, remained steadfast in his denial, his practicality, a stubborn shield against the encroaching strangeness. He dismissed Ilara's spiritualist texts as superstitious nonsense and city trickery. He argued that the phenomena were products of their own frayed nerves, of the drafty old house, or of Emma's quiet nature leading to overactive imaginations. He would meticulously check for hidden strings, for faulty floorboards, for any rational explanation, no matter how convoluted. Yet even Johann found himself increasingly unable to explain away the bolder manifestations. The heavy wooden chair that would slide several inches across the room when Emma was agitated, the faint shimmering lights that would sometimes briefly illuminate the dark corners of the house, or the inexplicable cold spots that would follow Emma, even on the warmest summer days. His denial became a desperate, lonely battle against a truth that was slowly but surely overwhelming him. The climax of this period of growing anomaly occurred during a severe winter storm, when the Richter farm was completely cut off from Oberammer. A sudden, violent gust of wind tore a section of the roof from the barn, exposing their livestock to the brutal cold. Johann, desperate, rushed out to assess the damage, but the wind was too fierce, the timbers too heavy to manage alone. As he struggled, despair etched on his face. Emma, then aged 7, stood silently in the farmhouse doorway, her unnervingly still blue eyes fixed on the damaged barn. A moment of profound quiet descended, as if the storm itself held its breath. Then, with a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the very ground, a large, heavy timber from the fallen roof section slowly, impossibly, began to lift. It hovered for a moment, suspended against the raging wind, before gently, almost deliberately, settling back into place, perfectly aligning with the remaining roofline. The wind immediately died down around the barn, though it continued to howl. Elsewhere, Johann, witnessing this impossible feat, stood frozen, his practical mind shattered by the undeniable reality before him. Ilara rushed to his side, her face pale, but her eyes wide with a terrifying understanding. Emma, still standing in the doorway, showed no emotion, no sign of effort, her gaze serene. The event, witnessed by both parents, left them utterly undone. Johann's denial crumbled, replaced by a profound, chilling fear. He no longer saw just his daughter. He saw an anomaly, a force that defied all natural laws, a living mystery that had taken root in his home. Ilara, though terrified, felt a strange, almost protective awe. Her daughter was not merely touched by the Fae or by spirits. She was something else, something unique, something powerful. The incident with the barn roof marked a terrifying turning point. The Richter family was no longer just isolated. They were profoundly, irrevocably alone with their enigma. Johann retreated further into a shell of silent fear, his once strong hands now trembling, his practical mind broken. Ilara, though still devout, found herself grappling with a faith that offered no comfort in the face of such inexplicable power. They tried, with increasing desperation, to understand Emma, to control the phenomena, but the unseen influence around her continued to grow, manifesting in ways that were both wondrous and terrifying. The whispers of Oberammer would soon reach beyond the valley, drawing the attention of those who sought to understand, or perhaps exploit, the very nature of the unexplained. The stage was set for Emma Richter to become not just a village anomaly, but a subject of intense scientific scrutiny, a girl whose existence would challenge the very foundations of the Age of Reason. The impossible feat of the barn roof, witnessed by both Johann and Ilara Richter, had shattered the last vestiges of their denial. Johann, the pragmatic carpenter, was a broken man, his mind unable to reconcile the undeniable reality with his ordered worldview. Ilara, though terrified, felt a strange, almost reverent awe for her daughter, a child who was clearly more than human. The Richter family was now utterly alone with their enigma, their isolation from the fearful villagers of Oberammer complete. Yet the very strangeness they sought to conceal would soon reach beyond the secluded valley, drawing the attention of those who sought to understand, or perhaps exploit, the very nature of the unexplained. This marked the beginning of the scrutiny of reason, the arrival of the investigators, as Emma Richter became not just a village anomaly, but a subject of intense scientific and public fascination in an age obsessed with unraveling the mysteries of the universe. The whispers from Oberammer, carried by infrequent travelers and the nervous few who still ventured near the Richter farm, eventually reached the ears of the wider world. Tales of a silent child, of objects moving without touch, and of a barn roof inexplicably repaired by unseen forces were initially dismissed as rural superstition, the product of isolated minds. However, the late 19th century was a fertile ground for such stories. The burgeoning field of psychical research was gaining traction, with prominent scientists and intellectuals forming societies dedicated to investigating alleged spiritualist phenomena, telekinesis, and other anomalies that challenged conventional understanding. In an era where the boundaries of science were rapidly expanding, the unexplained held a powerful allure. It was through this burgeoning network of curious minds that the story of Emma Richter found its way to Professor Alaric Thorne, a distinguished physicist from a renowned European university. Thorne was a man of formidable intellect, known for his rigorous adherence to the scientific method and his deep skepticism towards anything that defied empirical observation. He had made a name for himself, debunking fraudulent mediums and exposing elaborate hoaxes. Yet the persistent, consistent nature of the reports from Oberammer, particularly the account of the barn roof, piqued his interest. It lacked the theatricality of typical spiritualist performances and seemed to possess a raw, unadorned quality that suggested something genuinely anomalous. Thorne, driven by a desire to either explain or definitively disprove, decided to investigate. Professor, Thorne arrived in Oberammer not with fanfare, but with a quiet, methodical purpose. He was accompanied by Dr. Elias Vance, a young, ambitious physician with a keen interest in neurology and the nascent field of psychology. Vance, unlike Thorne, approached the case with a blend of scientific curiosity and a more open-minded perspective towards the potential for unknown human faculties. Their arrival in the secluded village caused a ripple of apprehension. The villagers, already wary of outsiders, viewed them with suspicion, unsure whether these men of science would bring understanding or further condemnation upon Emma. Father Klaus, the village priest, met them with a grim solemnity, his earlier encounter with Emma having left him with a profound sense of unease that transcended simple religious dogma. Their initial interactions with Johann and Ilara Richter were fraught with tension. Johann, still reeling from the barn incident, was deeply distrustful, fearing that these city men would only bring further disruption and judgment upon his family. He clung to his shattered practicality, offering convoluted explanations for the phenomena, even as his eyes betrayed his terror. Ilara, however, weary from years of living with the inexplicable, saw a glimmer of hope in their arrival. She desperately yearned for understanding, for a framework that could explain her daughter's unique nature, even if that understanding brought its own set of fears. She cautiously, yet honestly, recounted the strange occurrences, from Emma's silent birth to the impossible repair of the barn roof, her voice trembling with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Professor Thorne and Dr. Vance established their temporary laboratory in a rented cottage near the Richter farm, transforming it with an array of scientific instruments, delicate balances, electrometers, thermometers, and an assortment of measuring devices designed to detect even the most subtle deviations from known physical laws. Their approach was systematic and rigorous. They began with meticulous observations of Emma, noting her unnerving calmness, her piercing blue gaze, and her profound silence. They documented every instance of anomalous activity, cross-referencing it with Emma's proximity, her emotional state, though she rarely displayed overt emotion, and environmental conditions. The phenomena under scientific scrutiny did not cease. In fact, they seemed to subtly respond to the investigators' presence, as if Emma's unseen influence was now aware of being observed. During controlled experiments, small objects placed on a table near Emma would sometimes tremble, then lift a fraction of an inch, defying gravity, before gently settling back down. A delicate needle on an electrometer would occasionally deflect wildly when Emma was in the room, even when she was perfectly still and no known electrical source was present. The air around her would sometimes grow inexplicably cold, a localized chill that registered on their precise thermometers, even as the rest of the room remained warm. These were not grand displays, but subtle, persistent anomalies that, under rigorous scientific observation, could not be dismissed as trickery or coincidence. Dr. Vance, with his medical and psychological background, focused on Emma herself. He conducted thorough physical examinations, finding her to be a perfectly healthy child, albeit one with an unusually low heart rate and an almost imperceptible breathing pattern when at rest. He attempted to engage her in conversation, to understand her inner world, but Emma remained largely silent, her responses brief and ethereal. He noted her profound detachment, her lack of typical childish emotions, and her unnerving ability to seemingly see beyond the immediate. Vance began to hypothesize about a unique neurological configuration, a brain structure that allowed her to interact with unseen energies or dimensions, a concept far ahead of his time. He was fascinated, yet increasingly disturbed, by the implications of her existence. Professor Thorne, the staunch skeptic, found his scientific certainty slowly eroding. He meticulously checked every variable, every possible source of error, every potential for fraud. He installed hidden wires, concealed mechanisms, and observed Emma through one-way glass. But the phenomena persisted, defying all his attempts at rational explanation. The barn incident, which he had initially dismissed as a collective hallucination, now took on a chilling new significance. He began to consider theories that pushed the boundaries of his scientific understanding, unknown forces, undiscovered energies, a form of psychokinesis so subtle and innate that it operated beyond conscious control. The very laws of physics, which he had dedicated his life to upholding, seemed to bend in Emma Richter's presence. The presence of the investigators, however, also brought unintended consequences. The intense scrutiny, though scientific, placed an immense psychological burden on Emma's parents. Johann, already broken, found his home transformed into a laboratory, his daughter a specimen. Ilara, who had initially hoped for understanding, now feared exploitation. She began to notice the subtle shift in Thorne's and Vance's expressions. The initial skepticism replaced by a growing fascination that bordered on obsession. They spoke of data, of anomalies, of a unique case, but rarely of Emma as a child. Ilara's protective instincts flared, even as she remained trapped by her desperate need for answers. The climax of this period of scrutiny came when Professor Thorne, frustrated by his inability to replicate or definitively explain the phenomena, proposed a more invasive experiment: to isolate Emma in a specially constructed sealed chamber designed to eliminate all external variables and measure her influence with absolute precision. Johann vehemently refused, his paternal instincts overriding his fear. But Ilara, desperate for a definitive answer, for a way to either understand or contain her daughter's power, hesitated. The debate raged, a silent battle between scientific ambition and parental love, while Emma herself remained in her unnerving silence, her blue eyes seemingly observing it all. The whispers from Oberammer, now amplified by the presence of the city scientists, reached the ears of a wider, more sensationalist public. Newspapers, eager for a captivating story, began to print lurid accounts of the silent wonder of Oberammer and the girl who bends reality. The Richter farm, once avoided, now became a morbid curiosity, with occasional gawkers attempting to catch a glimpse of the enigmatic child. The family's isolation had been shattered, their private torment exposed to the harsh glare of public fascination. The age of reason, in its relentless pursuit of truth, had stumbled upon an anomaly it could not explain, and the consequences would be far-reaching and terrifying. The stage was set for Emma Richter to become not just a subject of scientific scrutiny, but a phenomenon that would draw the attention of those with far less benevolent intentions, those who sought to exploit the very nature of the unexplained. The intense scientific scrutiny brought by Professor Thorne and Dr. Vance, coupled with the sensationalized newspaper accounts, had irrevocably shattered the Richter family's fragile isolation. Emma Richter, the silent child of Oberammer, was no longer a local anomaly. She was a public curiosity, a living testament to the inexplicable in an age desperate for answers. But the glare of public fascination, however dazzling, often casts a long, dangerous shadow. This marked the beginning of the shadow of exploitation, a dangerous fascination, as Emma Richter became a magnet for those with far less benevolent intentions than scientific understanding, drawing her and her family into a perilous world of ambition, greed, and the chilling desire to control the unknown. The news of the silent wonder of Oberammer spread like wildfire, fueled by the tantalizing reports of objects moving without touch, inexplicable cold spots, and the child's unnerving stillness. While Professor Thorne and Dr. Vance continued their rigorous, if increasingly frustrated attempts at empirical measurement, their very presence had opened a Pandora's box. The scientific community, initially skeptical, was now divided, some dismissing the reports as elaborate hoaxes, others cautiously admitting the possibility of genuine, unclassified phenomena. But beyond the academic debates, a more unsavory element began to stir. Individuals and groups who saw not a scientific enigma, but an opportunity. Among the first to arrive, drawn by the sensational headlines, were the charlatans and showmen of the era. These were men and women who preyed on public credulity, staging elaborate seances, fake spirit manifestations, and dubious displays of psychic power for profit. They saw Emma as the ultimate attraction, a genuine marvel that could legitimize their fraudulent enterprises. Disguised as sympathetic spiritualists or benevolent healers, they descended upon Oberammer, attempting to gain access to the Richter farm. Johann, in his broken state, was easily swayed by promises of fame or even a cure for Emma's strangeness. Ilara, however, Her maternal instincts, sharpened by years of fear and a growing distrust of outsiders, saw through their thin veneers of empathy. She fiercely protected Emma, refusing entry to those she instinctively knew sought only to exploit. Her daughter's unique nature, yet their persistent presence, their veiled threats, and their constant attempts to bribe the few remaining servants only added to the family's torment. More dangerous than the common charlatans were the private, collectors and wealthy eccentrics who operated in the shadows of society. These individuals, often driven by an obsessive desire for the rare and the unusual, saw Emma not as a child, but as a priceless acquisition, a living artifact of the unexplained. They sent emissaries to Oberhammer, offering vast sums of money, to Johann and Elara, promising Emma a life of luxury and the finest education, all while subtly hinting at the benefits of their protection from the prying eyes of the public. Their offers were insidious, preying on the Richter's financial vulnerability and their desperate hope for a better life for Emma. Elara, though tempted by the thought of security, felt a profound revulsion at the idea of her daughter being treated as a possession. Johann, however, weakened by despair, began to waver, his practicality struggling against his paternal love. The most chilling interest came from shadowy organizations with less defined, more sinister agendas. These were groups often operating on the fringes of government or secretive societies dedicated to the study and control of anomalous phenomena. They did not seek to exploit Emma for profit or display. They sought to understand, to replicate, and ultimately to weaponize her abilities. Their agents arrived in Oberhammer discreetly, posing as unassuming scholars or quiet observers. They did not attempt to bribe or persuade. Instead, they watched, they listened, and they gathered information with a cold, calculating efficiency. They were interested not in Emma's well-being, but in the raw power she represented, the implications of her existence for the balance of power in a rapidly modernizing world. The presence of these various, often unseen forces created an atmosphere of profound paranoia around the Richter farm. Elara felt a constant sense of being watched, a prickling sensation on her skin, even when no one was visible. Strange carriages would sometimes be seen parked on distant roads overlooking their property. Letters with no return address, containing cryptic warnings or unsettling inquiries, began to arrive. The family's isolation had been replaced by a terrifying sense of being besieged, their home transformed from a sanctuary into a cage, with unseen eyes constantly observing their every move. Professor Thorne and Dr. Vance, initially oblivious to the full extent of these external threats, found their scientific endeavors increasingly hampered. Their controlled experiments were disrupted by curious onlookers, their equipment tampered with, and their own movements shadowed. Thorne, with his keen intellect, began to sense the shift in the atmosphere, the subtle undercurrent of something more sinister than mere public curiosity. He recognized the signs of professional charlatans, but also the chilling efficiency of more organized, less visible entities. His frustration at not being able to explain Emma scientifically was now compounded by a growing fear for her safety. Dr. Vance, with his more empathetic approach, grew increasingly concerned for Emma herself. He observed her profound detachment, her unnerving silence, and wondered about the psychological toll of being the center of such intense, often malevolent, attention. He saw her not as a specimen, but as a child, caught in a terrifying maelstrom of forces she could not comprehend or control. He tried to advocate for her, to warn Johann and Elara of the dangers, but his words often fell on deaf ears, lost in the cacophony of their fear and despair. The climax of this period of dangerous fascination came with a direct attempt to seize Emma. One moonless night, a group of masked figures, clearly not local villagers, descended upon the Richter farm. They moved with a chilling precision, overpowering Johann and Elara, who fought with a desperate, futile courage. Their intention was clear: to abduct Emma. The manor was plunged into chaos, the sounds of struggle echoing through the quiet night. As the figures closed in on Emma's room, a terrifying, silent force erupted. Objects in the room began to fly with incredible velocity, not merely shifting, but hurtling with destructive power. Furniture splintered, windows shattered, and the very walls seemed to groan under an unseen pressure. The air grew impossibly cold, and the murmuring chorus around Emma swelled into a deafening, disorienting roar that seemed to vibrate through one's very bones. The masked figures, caught off guard by this raw, uncontrolled display of power, were thrown back, some injured, others simply terrified by the sheer, unexplainable force. They retreated in disarray, their sophisticated plans shattered by the primal defensive eruption of Emma's anomaly. Johann and Ilara, battered but alive, found Emma standing in the center of her demolished room, her blue eyes wide and luminous in the darkness, her face still serene, as if unaware of the chaos she had unleashed. The room was a wreck, a testament to the destructive potential of her unseen influence when provoked. The failed abduction attempt left the Richter family utterly traumatized, but also profoundly changed. Johann's fear solidified into a grim determination to protect his daughter at all costs. Ilara's protective instincts became an unyielding shield. They knew now that the threat was not just from whispers and curiosity, but from tangible, dangerous forces that sought to control Emma. Professor Thorne and Dr. Vance, arriving shortly after the incident, found the Richter farm in ruins, a scene of devastation that defied any rational explanation. They understood then the true gravity of Emma's situation. The scientific pursuit of understanding had inadvertently exposed her to immense peril. The age of reason had stumbled upon an anomaly it could not explain, and in its wake, it had unleashed a dangerous fascination that now threatened Emma's very life. The family's desperate need for protection would soon lead them to make a fateful decision, one that would take Emma far from Oberammer into a world where the lines between science, wonder, and exploitation were dangerously blurred. The shattered remnants of the Richter farmhouse, a testament to Emma's raw defensive power, served as a grim turning point. Johann, his practicality finally broken, and Ilara, her protective instincts now an unyielding shield, understood with chilling clarity that Oberammer was no longer safe. The failed abduction attempt had revealed the true depth of the danger, proving that Emma was not merely an anomaly to be studied, but a force to be controlled, a prize to be seized. Their desperate need for protection, for a sanctuary from the relentless fascination and sinister intentions of the outside world, would soon lead them to a fateful decision, one that would take Emma far from the familiar, if now terrifying, confines of their village, into a world that promised understanding, but delivered a new kind of prison. The controlled environment, a new prison. Professor Alaric Thorne and Dr. Elias Vance, witnessing the devastation at the Richter farm, understood the gravity of the situation. Thorne, his scientific skepticism irrevocably shaken, now felt a profound responsibility for the peril Emma faced, a peril inadvertently exacerbated by his own pursuit of knowledge. Vance, ever the empath, saw a child caught in a terrifying maelstrom, her unique existence threatening to consume her. They knew Emma could not remain in Oberammer. The charlatans, the collectors, and the shadowy organizations would not be deterred by one failed attempt. They would return, more determined and more ruthless. It was Professor Thorne who proposed the solution, one that, while offering protection, came with its own set of profound compromises. He had connections to a clandestine research facility, a private institution funded by a consortium of wealthy, scientifically minded philanthropists who shared a deep interest in anomalous phenomena. This facility, located in a remote, undisclosed location, promised absolute secrecy, state-of-the-art, equipment, and a dedicated team of researchers committed to understanding the unexplained. They offered the Richters not just refuge, but a life of comfort, financial security, and most importantly, the promise of a controlled environment where Emma could be studied safely, perhaps even understood. The decision weighed heavily on Johann and Ilara. Leaving their home, their village, and everything they knew was an agonizing prospect. But the fear of what would happen if they stayed, the terror of another abduction attempt, the constant paranoia, ultimately swayed them. They agreed, not without profound misgivings, to entrust Emma to the facility's care. Their departure from Oberammer was as quiet and unsettling as Emma's birth. Under the cloak of darkness, a discreet carriage arrived, its windows heavily draped, taking the Richter family away from the only home they had ever known, leaving behind the whispers and suspicions of the villagers, and the lingering chill of Emma's unexplained power. The journey was long and arduous, filled with a tension that permeated the very air within the carriage. Emma, as always, remained silent, her unnervingly still blue eyes observing the passing landscape, seemingly unaffected by the profound upheaval in her life. Johann and Ilara, however, clung to each other, their faces etched with a mix of fear, hope, and a desperate, aching sorrow for the life they were leaving behind. They arrived at the facility under heavy guard, a sprawling complex of imposing, utilitarian buildings nestled deep within a secluded, mountainous region far from any prying eyes. Its very architecture spoke of efficiency, control, and secrecy. The facility was a marvel of late 19th century scientific engineering, a veritable fortress dedicated to the study of the anomalous. Emma and her parents were housed in a comfortable, yet undeniably sterile, suite of rooms. Their every need was met, their comfort assured, but the underlying reality was clear. This was not a home, it was a gilded cage. Every door was secured, every window reinforced, and every movement monitored by a network of discreet yet omnipresent guards and silent, watchful staff. The promise of protection had come at the cost of freedom. Emma's new life became a rigorous schedule of scientific observation and experimentation. Professor Thorne and Dr. Vance, now joined by a team of equally brilliant but often more detached researchers, meticulously designed a series of controlled tests. Emma was placed in specially constructed chambers, isolated from all external stimuli, where her influence could be measured with unprecedented precision. Delicate instruments, far more sophisticated than those used in Oberammer, surrounded her. Highly sensitive electrometers, precise thermometers, gravimeters designed to detect minute fluctuations in gravitational fields, and cameras that meticulously documented every shift, every flicker, every inexplicable movement. The phenomena around Emma continued, even intensified, under these controlled conditions. Objects, carefully placed on pedestals, would levitate for extended periods, rotating slowly in the air before gently descending. The temperature in her immediate vicinity would plummet to near freezing, even in a heated room, creating visible condensation in the air. The faint murmuring chorus that accompanied her presence would now register on sensitive audio recording devices, a low, resonant hum that baffled the acousticians. Electrical currents would inexplicably surge and dissipate around her, causing instruments to malfunction or glow faintly. These were not tricks of light or faulty wiring. These were undeniable, repeatable manifestations of an unseen force, a power that emanated from Emma Richter. Dr. Vance, with his focus on the human element, continued his attempts to communicate with Emma, to understand the source of her abilities from within. He spent hours observing her, trying to decipher her unnerving silence, her piercing gaze. He conducted psychological assessments, finding her intellect to be far beyond her years, yet her emotional responses profoundly muted, almost detached. He hypothesized that her abilities might be linked to an unconscious, perhaps even subconscious, manipulation of fundamental forces, a unique neurological pathway that allowed her mind to interact directly with the fabric of reality. He saw the profound isolation of her existence, the burden of being an anomaly, and felt a growing compassion for the child trapped within the scientific marvel. Professor Thorne, however, became increasingly obsessed with the raw power Emma represented. His initial skepticism had transformed into a fervent desire to understand and ultimately to control. He saw her not just as a scientific enigma, but as a living key to unlocking new realms of physics, new forms of energy. His experiments grew, more ambitious, more demanding, pushing Emma to the limits of her abilities, always with the promise of understanding as the ultimate goal. He began to view her less as a child and more as a phenomenon, a living laboratory. The moral implications of their relentless experimentation, of treating a human being as a subject, began to weigh heavily on Dr. Vance, creating a growing rift between the two former colleagues. Johann and Alara, witnessing their daughter's new life as a perpetual experiment, found themselves trapped in their gilded cage. Their comfort was assured, but their freedom was gone. They were permitted to see Emma, but always under strict supervision, their interactions monitored, their conversations recorded. Johann, still broken, retreated further into himself, his despair deepening as he watched his daughter become a permanent subject of study. Ilara, however, began to fight back in her own quiet way. She subtly sabotaged experiments, feigned illness, to gain more time with Emma, and tried to shield her daughter from the most invasive procedures. She saw the growing obsession in Thorne's eyes, the cold ambition that replaced his initial scientific curiosity, and she feared for Emma's soul as much as her safety. The facility itself, despite its scientific veneer, began to feel like a new kind of prison, its sterile corridors echoing with the constant hum of machinery and the silent, watchful presence of its staff. Emma, though seemingly serene, was now confined, her unique power meticulously measured, documented, and analyzed, but never truly understood in its entirety. The murmuring chorus around her, once a subtle background, now seemed to fill the very air of the facility, a constant resonant hum that only the most sensitive instruments and perhaps Emma herself truly perceived. The promise of understanding had morphed into the reality of control, and Emma Richter, the girl science couldn't explain, was now the girl science sought to contain and master. This relentless pursuit of control would soon lead to a series of escalating events as Emma's power, pushed to its limits, began to manifest in ways that even the most advanced scientific minds could not predict or contain. The sterile, controlled environment of the clandestine research facility, once a promised sanctuary for Emma Richter, had quickly transformed into a new kind of prison. Professor Thorne's ambition had eclipsed his initial scientific curiosity, turning Emma into a living experiment, a phenomenon to be understood and, ultimately, controlled. Dr. Vance, increasingly troubled by the moral implications, found himself caught between his scientific loyalty and a growing compassion for the child. Within this gilded cage, Emma's unique power, pushed to its limits by relentless experimentation, began to manifest in ways that even the most advanced scientific minds could not predict or contain, leading to the uncontainable force, escalation, and breakdown. The daily regimen of tests grew increasingly invasive. Professor Thorne, driven by a fervent desire to quantify and replicate Emma's abilities, designed experiments that pushed the boundaries of ethical consideration. He sought to understand the precise nature of the unseen influence that surrounded her, believing it to be a new form of energy, a force that could revolutionize physics. Emma was subjected to prolonged periods of isolation in specially constructed lead-lined chambers, designed to eliminate all external variables and measure her influence with absolute precision. Delicate instruments, far more sophisticated than any used before, surrounded her. Highly sensitive electrometers that registered inexplicable surges, precise thermometers that plummeted to near freezing in her vicinity, and gravimeters that detected minute, baffling fluctuations in gravitational fields. Under this relentless pressure, Emma's manifestations escalated dramatically. What were once subtle shifts became undeniable, often violent, displays of power. Objects in her containment, chambers, carefully placed on pedestals for observation, would not merely levitate. They would sometimes shatter with explosive force, sending shards of glass and metal scattering. Heavy equipment, designed to withstand immense pressure, would buckle and twist as if crushed by an invisible hand. The localized cold spots around. Her intensified, dropping temperatures to below freezing, causing visible frost to form on the walls of her chamber, even in a heated room. The faint, murmuring chorus that had always accompanied her presence now swelled into a resonant, disorienting hum that not only registered on audio recording devices, but could be felt as a physical vibration in the very bones of those nearby. Electrical currents would surge and dissipate with terrifying unpredictability, causing power fluctuations throughout the facility, shorting out sensitive instruments, and even causing the lights in distant corridors to flicker ominously. The research team, initially exhilarated by these heightened manifestations, soon found themselves grappling with a growing sense of dread. Their scientific instruments, designed to measure and explain, were now merely recording the inexplicable, their data baffling, their theories collapsing under the weight of Emma's raw, untamed power. Accidents became more frequent. Technicians, working near Emma's chambers, reported sudden, violent nosebleeds, inexplicable nausea, and a profound sense of disorientation. Some experienced vivid waking nightmares, their minds tormented by the constant, resonant hum that seemed to penetrate their very thoughts. The sterile, controlled environment was becoming a chaotic, dangerous place, its scientific veneer cracking under the strain of an uncontainable force. Dr. Vance, witnessing this terrifying escalation, became increasingly vocal in his opposition to Thorne's methods. He argued vehemently that Emma was not merely a phenomenon but a child, and that the relentless experimentation was causing her profound distress, even if she displayed no overt emotion. He theorized that her power was not a conscious ability, but an unconscious, perhaps even defensive, manifestation of her unique neurological state, a raw energy that reacted to external stimuli and emotional pressure. He saw the subtle tension in Emma's unnervingly still eyes, the faint tremor in her tiny hands when the pressure of the experiments became too great. He believed that Thorne's relentless pursuit of control was pushing Emma to a breaking point and that the consequences could be catastrophic. Professor Thorne, however, was too consumed by his ambition to heed Vance's warnings. He saw the escalating manifestations not as a sign of distress, but as proof of Emma's immense, untapped potential. He became increasingly ruthless in his pursuit of understanding, dismissing Vance's concerns as sentimentalism and unscientific emotionalism. He began to isolate Emma further, limiting her contact with her parents, believing their presence was an uncontrolled variable that interfered with his measurements. His obsession grew to a terrifying degree, his eyes gleaming with a cold, calculating ambition that replaced any semblance of human empathy. He was no longer a scientist seeking truth. He was a man driven by a dangerous desire for mastery over the unknown. Johann and Ilara, confined to their gilded cage, witnessed their daughter's transformation with a deepening despair. They saw the increasing pallor in Emma's face, the subtle, almost imperceptible tremor that now accompanied her profound stillness. They felt the resonant hum, the inexplicable cold, and understood that their daughter was suffering, her power becoming a burden, a torment. Ilara, her protective, Instincts now, a desperate fury, fought tirelessly against the facility's restrictions. She feigned illness, created diversions, and even attempted to bribe junior staff to gain more time with Emma to shield her from Thorne's relentless experiments. Johann, though still broken, found a renewed, quiet strength in his determination to protect his child, his fear transforming into a grim resolve. The growing rift between Thorne and Vance reached its breaking point. Vance, unable to tolerate Thorne's escalating disregard for Emma's well-being, confronted him directly, threatening to expose the unethical nature of their research to the consortium of philanthropists who funded the facility. Thorne enraged by this challenge to his authority and the threat to his life's work, dismissed Vance from the project, ordering him confined to his quarters and his communications severed. Vance, however, had anticipated this. He had secretly kept meticulous records of Thorne's increasingly extreme experiments and Emma's escalating manifestations, documenting the ethical breaches and the terrifying potential of her uncontained power. He knew he had to escape, to expose Thorne, and to save Emma from becoming a weapon or a casualty of scientific hubris. The climax of this period of escalation occurred during Thorne's most ambitious experiment yet. He sought to harness Emma's power, to channel it through a complex array of newly developed instruments, believing he could control its output. Emma was placed in a central chamber, surrounded by intricate machinery designed to measure and direct her influence. The air in the facility grew thick with tension, the resonant hum around Emma swelling to an almost unbearable crescendo. As Thorne initiated the experiment, pushing Emma to her absolute limits, the uncontainable force erupted with a terrifying, uncontrolled fury. The facility groaned under the immense, unseen pressure. Lights exploded, circuits overloaded, and machinery tore itself apart. The localized cold around Emma expanded rapidly, freezing the air, causing pipes to burst and condensation to form into sheets of ice. The resonant hum became a deafening, disorienting roar that shattered glass and caused structural damage throughout the complex. The very fabric of reality seemed to warp and shimmer around Emma's chamber, as if the dimensions themselves were under strain. Guards and researchers were thrown violently against walls by unseen forces, their screams lost in the cacophony of destruction. In the midst of the chaos, Emma remained at the center of the maelstrom, her eyes wide, luminous, and filled with an emotion rarely seen, a profound, silent anguish. It was as if her power, pushed beyond endurance, was lashing out, a desperate, primal scream from a child overwhelmed by forces she could not comprehend. Johann and Elara, witnessing the terrifying breakdown of the facility from their confinement, knew this was their chance. In the ensuing chaos, with alarms blaring and the facility crumbling around them, they found a way to escape their suite, their only thought to reach Emma. The uncontainable force had finally broken free, shattering the illusion of control and exposing the terrifying consequences of unchecked ambition. The state-of-the-art facility, designed to contain the unknown, was collapsing under the very power it sought to master. The promise of understanding had dissolved into a nightmare of destruction, and Emma Richter, the girl science couldn't explain, was now the catalyst for a terrifying breakdown that would leave a permanent scar on the annals of psychical research. The stage was set for a desperate flight, as Emma and her parents sought to escape not just the crumbling facility, but the relentless pursuit of those who still sought to control her. The catastrophic eruption of Emma's power had plunged the clandestine research facility into a maelstrom of chaos and destruction. Lights exploded, machinery tore itself apart, and the very structure groaned under an immense unseen pressure. The air, impossibly cold and vibrating with a deafening hum, was thick with the acrid scent of ozone and shattered ambition. Professor Thorne's relentless pursuit of control had backfired spectacularly, unleashing a force he could neither comprehend nor contain. In the heart of this terrifying breakdown, a desperate opportunity for escape presented itself, marking the beginning of the desperate flight, escape from the gilded cage. Johann and Elara Richter, battered but resolute, had witnessed the facility's collapse from their confined suite. The blaring alarms, the distant screams, and the terrifying tremors that shook their very foundations were not signs of despair, but of a desperate, fleeting chance. Elara, her protective instincts honed by years of fear and a mother's unwavering love, was the first to act. She used a heavy, ornate chair to smash the reinforced glass of their suite's inner door, the sound lost in the cacophony of the crumbling facility. Johann, his strength renewed by a primal need to protect his child, followed her, his eyes fixed on the distant section of the complex where Emma's chamber was located. Their only thought was to reach their daughter, to pull her from the heart of the maelstrom she had unwittingly created. Navigating the collapsing corridors was a nightmare. The facility, once a marvel of scientific engineering, was now a labyrinth of twisted metal, sparking wires, and falling debris. The pervasive cold that emanated from Emma's chamber intensified with every step, freezing the air and making their breaths mist. The resonant hum, a constant presence around Emma, now filled the entire complex, a disorienting roar that vibrated through their bones, making their teeth ache and their vision blur. They stumbled over fallen equipment, dodged collapsing ceiling panels, and pushed past terrified, disoriented researchers and guards who were more concerned with their own survival than with containing the anomaly. Elara, with an almost uncanny intuition, seemed to sense Emma's location, pulling Johann through the chaos with a fierce determination. They found Emma's central chamber in a state of utter devastation. The reinforced walls were cracked, the intricate machinery twisted into grotesque sculptures of metal, and the heavy containment door lay ripped from its hinges. In the center of the wreckage stood Emma, her small figure eerily still amidst the destruction, her blue eyes wide and luminous, reflecting the shattered glass and sparking wires around her. The air around her shimmered with an almost visible energy, and the cold was absolute, radiating outwards like an icy wave. She was the calm eye of the storm, the silent epicenter of the uncontainable force. Reaching Emma was a perilous task. The very air around her chamber seemed to resist their approach, a physical barrier of pressure and cold. But Johann and Elara, driven by a love that defied all logic, pushed through. They reached their daughter, pulling her into their desperate embrace. Emma, for the first time in years, reacted. Her small hands, usually still, gripped their clothes, and a faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through her body. It was a silent acknowledgement, a fragile connection in the heart of chaos. Their escape from the facility was a desperate, harrowing flight. They moved through the crumbling complex, guided by the sounds of distant alarms and the sporadic flashes of emergency lights. The facility's security systems, once impenetrable, were now in disarray, their power severed or overloaded by Emma's uncontrolled manifestations. They stumbled upon a rarely used service tunnel, a dark, narrow passage that led away from the main complex, a forgotten escape route that now offered their only hope. As they made their way through the tunnel, the sounds of the collapsing facility slowly faded behind them, replaced by the rhythmic drip of water and the scuttling of unseen creatures. But the pervasive cold that surrounded Emma and the faint, resonant hum that emanated from her remained. It was a constant reminder of the power they carried, a power that could both destroy and protect. They emerged from the tunnel into the cold, crisp night air, far from the main gates, finding themselves on a secluded mountain path, shrouded by ancient pines and the vast, indifferent sky. Their immediate freedom, however, was fleeting. Professor Thorne, though shaken and injured by the facility's breakdown, was far from defeated. His ambition, now fueled by a terrifying blend of rage and obsession, remained intact. He quickly rallied the remaining loyal staff and security, initiating a relentless pursuit. Thorne was convinced that Emma was not just a phenomenon, but a weapon, a key to unlocking unimaginable power, and he would not allow her to escape his grasp. He believed that the destruction was merely an uncontrolled manifestation, a temporary setback, and that with enough resources and a more ruthless approach, he could still master her abilities. Dr. Elias Vance, having anticipated Thorne's ruthless response, had managed to escape his confinement in the chaos. He knew Thorne would stop at nothing to recapture Emma. Vance, driven by a profound sense of guilt and a desperate need to protect the child he had come to empathize with, set out on his own, determined to reach Emma and her family before Thorne's forces did. He carried with him the meticulously documented evidence of Thorne's unethical experiments and the terrifying potential of Emma's uncontained power, hoping to expose the truth and find a genuine sanctuary for the Richter family. The desperate flight became a harrowing journey through the unforgiving wilderness. Johann, relying on his knowledge of the land and his carpenter's ingenuity, fashioned makeshift shelters and found hidden paths. Ilara, her faith a fragile comfort, drew strength from her love for Emma, shielding her from the harsh elements and the constant threat of pursuit. Emma, though still largely silent, seemed to sense their desperation. The phenomena around her, once destructive, now seemed to subtly aid them. A sudden localized cold front that obscured their tracks in the snow, a brief, disorienting hum, that confused their pursuers, a flickering light that guided their way through the darkest nights. It was as if her power, now unbound by containment, was instinctively responding to their need for survival. They were hunted relentlessly. Thorne's men, armed with modern tracking equipment and a chilling determination, scoured the mountains, their presence a constant, unseen threat. The sound of distant gunshots, the baying of tracking dogs, and the glint of lanterns in the darkness were constant reminders of the peril they faced. Johann and Ilara, exhausted and terrified, pushed themselves to their limits, driven by the singular goal of protecting their daughter from those who sought to imprison or exploit her. The escape from the facility was not an end, but a terrifying new beginning. Emma Richter, the girl science couldn't explain, was now a fugitive, her family her only protectors against a world that sought to understand, control, or exploit her unique power. The cold, silent hum that surrounded her was no longer just a scientific anomaly. It was the chilling soundtrack of their desperate flight, a constant reminder of the uncontainable force they carried. Their journey would lead them through a world of shadows, where trust was a luxury and sanctuary an elusive dream, as they sought a place where Emma could simply exist, untouched by the relentless fascination that had nearly consumed her. The catastrophic collapse of the clandestine facility, triggered by Emma's uncontainable power, had propelled the Richter family into a desperate, harrowing flight. Johann, Ilara, and their enigmatic daughter were now fugitives, hunted relentlessly by Professor Thorne's forces, who sought to recapture the living anomaly he had so spectacularly failed to control. The cold, silent hum that surrounded Emma was no longer just a scientific curiosity. It was the chilling soundtrack of their desperate struggle for survival, a constant reminder of the immense, unexplained force they carried. This was the final, arduous chapter of their journey, leading them towards the unseen sanctuary, a life beyond explanation, a fragile peace where Emma Richter could finally exist, untouched by the relentless fascination that had nearly consumed her. Their escape from the crumbling facility was merely the first step into a world that was both vast and terrifying. The wilderness, with its unforgiving mountains, dense forests, and treacherous ravines, became their immediate sanctuary and their greatest challenge. Johann, the practical carpenter, rediscovered a primal ingenuity. He fashioned makeshift shelters. From fallen branches and tarpaulins, found hidden springs for water, and taught Ilara and Emma how to forage for edible roots and berries. His hands, once accustomed to the precise measurements of wood, now moved with the desperate efficiency of a survivor. Ilara, her faith a fragile but enduring comfort, drew strength from her unwavering love for Emma. She shielded her daughter from the harsh elements, nursed their wounds, and maintained a constant vigil against the unseen threats that lurked in the shadows and pursued them from behind. Emma, though still largely silent and outwardly serene, was profoundly affected by their desperate circumstances. The phenomena around her, once destructive within the confines of the facility, now seemed to subtly, almost instinctively, aid their survival. When Thorne's tracking dogs drew too close, a sudden, localized cold front would descend, obscuring their scent and confusing their pursuers. When they were lost in the impenetrable darkness of the moonless nights, a faint, shimmering light, like a captured star, would flicker ahead, guiding their way along hidden paths only Johann seemed to instinctively follow. A brief, disorienting, barely perceptible to human ears but agonizing to the tracking dogs, would sometimes erupt, sending the animals into a terrified frenzy, buying the Richters precious time. It was as if Emma's power, now unbound by containment and responding to her parents' desperate need, was becoming a protective aura, an extension of her silent will, a shield woven from the very fabric of the unexplained. They were hunted, relentlessly. Professor Thorne, his face gaunt with exhaustion, but his eyes burning with a terrifying obsession, spared no expense in his pursuit. He deployed teams of skilled trackers, armed with the latest equipment, convinced that Emma was too valuable to lose. The distant sound of gunshots, the baying of dogs, and the glint of lanterns in the darkness were constant reminders of the peril they faced. Thorne's ambition had transformed into a singular, all-consuming madness. His reputation and fortune, now staked entirely on the recapture of Emma. He believed that the destruction of his facility was merely a temporary setback, a test of his resolve, and that once he had Emma back, he would finally unlock the secrets of her power and achieve scientific immortality. Meanwhile, Dr. Elias Vance, driven by a profound sense of guilt and a desperate need to protect Emma, pursued them independently. He knew Thorne's methods, his ruthlessness, and the dangers Emma faced. Vance carried with him the meticulously documented evidence of Thorne's unethical experiments and the terrifying potential of Emma's uncontained power, hoping to expose the truth and find a genuine sanctuary for the Richter family. His journey was also arduous, but his determination was unwavering. He was not seeking to capture Emma, but to save her, to offer a different path, one of understanding and acceptance rather than control and exploitation. The paths of the hunted and the hunters converged in a desolate, snow-covered pass high in the mountains. Thorne's lead team finally cornered the Richters, their faces grim, their weapons raised. Just as they closed in, the air around Emma shimmered violently. The cold intensified to an unbearable degree, freezing the very breath. In their lungs, the pervasive hum swelled into a deafening, disorienting roar that shattered the silence of the mountains, causing the pursuers to drop their weapons, clutching their heads in agony. Then, with a terrifying crack, the ground beneath them fractured, sending a cascade of snow and ice tumbling down the mountainside, creating a sudden, impassable chasm between the Richters and their pursuers. It was a manifestation of power so immense, so precise, that it defied all comprehension. As Thorne's men struggled amidst the chaos, Dr. Vance finally caught up. He found the Richters huddled together, exhausted but safe, on the other side of the newly formed chasm. Vance, seeing the raw power Emma had unleashed, knew he had to act quickly. He confronted Thorne, who had arrived moments later, his face contorted in a mixture of rage and disbelief. Vance presented his damning evidence, threatening to expose Thorne's unethical practices and the true nature of the facility's collapse to the world. Thorne, his ambition finally shattered by the irrefutable evidence of his failure and the looming threat of public disgrace, could only watch as Vance led the Richters away, disappearing into the vast, indifferent wilderness. Thorne's career was ruined, his reputation in tatters, his ultimate fate a quiet descent into obscurity, consumed by his own unfulfilled obsession. Dr. Vance, true to his word, did not seek to contain Emma. Instead, he led the Richters to a remote, secluded valley, far from the prying eyes of society, a place known only to a trusted few. Here, amidst a small, self-sufficient community of like-minded individuals who valued peace and quiet above all else, Emma Richter finally found her unseen sanctuary. It was a simple life, free from scientific instruments, from intrusive questions, and from the constant threat of exploitation. Johann found solace in working the land, rebuilding a sense of purpose with his hands. Ilara, her heart finally at peace, could simply be a mother, cherishing the quiet moments with her daughter. Emma, surrounded by acceptance rather than fear or ambition, slowly began to change. Her profound silence remained, but it was no longer unsettling. It was simply a part of her. The phenomena around her, though still present, became less volatile, more subtle, almost a gentle hum in the background of their lives. Objects would occasionally float, a localized chill might pass through a room, but these were now accepted as part of Emma's unique presence, not as terrifying anomalies. She never spoke of her powers, never tried to explain them. She simply existed, a child of wonder, living a life beyond explanation. Dr. Vance remained a lifelong friend and protector, visiting periodically not as an investigator but as a compassionate observer. He continued his research, but now with a profound respect for the unknown, publishing his findings cautiously, always protecting Emma's anonymity. He understood that some phenomena were not meant to be controlled, but simply acknowledged, accepted as part of the vast, intricate tapestry of existence. The story of Emma Richter, the girl science couldn't explain, became a legend whispered among those who delved into the fringes of psychical research and the unexplained. Her existence served as a powerful testament to the limits of human understanding, a reminder that even in an age of burgeoning scientific progress, there remained mysteries that defied all reason, forces that operated beyond the grasp of conventional laws. Emma Richter lived a long, quiet life in her unseen sanctuary, her unique power a constant, gentle presence, a living embodiment of the enduring wonder of the unknown. Her story, a chilling yet ultimately poignant tale, became a timeless reminder that some truths are not meant to be explained but simply to be.